We are finally, or only, at the halfway point of this very long election campaign, and it has been another busy week, so let's jump straight into it. The opposition leader spent the week in isolation, which meant we saw much more of Labor's team front the cameras in his place.
Hang on, we'll start here with Lani and then we'll go around.
Although Anthony Albanese was mostly sent well wishes from his opponents, Scott Morrison couldn't help but let loose with this dig on Thursday.
He's had a pretty quiet week. I remember when I was in ISO, I had a very busy week.
Albanese returned to the physical campaign trail on Friday and got straight in front of the studio cameras.
And how are you feeling?
It's good to be out of ISO. It's a beautiful sunny day here.
In terms of substantive policy issues addressed this week, national security was again towards the top of the list, with Peter Dutton, on Anzac Day no less, kicking it off with these provocative comments.
The only way that you can preserve peace is to prepare for war.
Labor agreed with the government on this point.
Our strategic circumstances are as complex as any point since the end of the Second World War, and we certainly need to prepare.
But they attacked the government for failing to do the actual preparation.
This is a government which beats its chest.
There's no point in beating your chest if you're beaten to the punch.
Former Coalition Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull also helpfully popped up this week, and he had this to say about his former colleagues.
Peter Dutton's rhetoric is becoming more and more bombastic and belligerent. It's just a pity that he doesn't match it with actual preparation. This is a hose you have to hold.
Meanwhile, Labor launched its own policy for dealing with the Pacific, promising more aid funding, help with climate change projects, and a broadcast policy to compete with China's broadcasts into the region. The Prime Minister, though, wasn't impressed.
What they're effectively saying is they're going to keep doing what we've been doing. There's one difference, though. I sent in the AFP. The Labor Party wants to send in the ABC.
Now, it wouldn't be an Australian election if there wasn't some sort of kerfuffle over climate policy. And even though both sides of politics now seem to broadly agree that climate change actually is a thing, it didn't stop this old scare campaign from being reheated this week.
And that's Labor's sneaky carbon tax. There's a sneaky carbon tax. He's got his sneaky carbon tax.
For many who have watched this space for the last decade, the re-emergence of the carbon tax scare campaign, even after the Morrison government had signed up to the net zero by 2050 target, was particularly disheartening.
Since the Abbott era, carbon pricing and climate action has been weaponised in the Australian election contest in order to keep the coalition in power. This is not a game. The science tells us that we don't have long to go.
This time, though, the climate policy kerfuffle is causing problems for Liberal MPs, particularly those in inner Sydney and inner Melbourne seats.
Okay. Trent, we're an international pariah when it comes to energy policy. You must admit, Australia is clearly identified as a laggard.
Strong independent candidates running on stronger climate action are pushing up against Liberal MPs such as Dave Sharma, Trent Zimmerman, and even the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg.
It was all calm, there was consensus on climate policy, and what do? You blow it up.
Their re-election hopes weren't helped when Queensland Senator Matt Canavan lobbed this grenade on the government's hard-fought net zero deal.
Yeah, well, the net zero thing is all sort of dead anyway. It's all over. I mean, it's all over bar the shouting here.
Now, Morrison told the United Nations last year that Australia would sign up to the net zero emissions by 2050 target, and this was after a very hard-won deal with the National Party. So it's now very awkward that some in the National Party are blowing that deal off. Morrison tried to downplay it.
Oh, everybody knows that Matt hasn't been supportive of that position. There's no news there.
While other members of the National Party had some stronger messages for their colleague.
Is it time for Matt Canavan to pull his head in?
Yes.
Yeah, pull your head in, Matt.
And then we hit midweek where a very consequential issue hit the election campaign.
Interest rates could rise as early as next week after inflation surged 2.1% in the March quarter. The cost of living increasing by 5.1% over the past year.
It's made it that much harder for the Prime Minister to capitalise on the "I'm the better economic manager" line. So he tried to spin it this way.
We're in the middle of a global pandemic with a war in Europe. Now, we're not immune as an economy from all the pressures coming in around the world, but I would argue strongly that our strong economic management has enabled us to put a shield up against a lot of these pressures.
Labor, though, have gone very hard, saying that there's quite a lot the government could have done over the last 9 years to make sure this didn't hit quite as hard.
Nothing that's happened around the world in the last few months excuses or explains almost a decade now of coalition attacks on wages and job security.
We're in the back end of the election campaign, which means things are about to get even messier as both major parties do everything they can to capture those undecided voters. Strap in, it's going to be rough.